What is the value of art? What is its purpose? How can art pull us into a world of imagination? Is art dangerous? How does the field of art relate to the world of ideas and philosophy? And, most importantly, how can art help me to live a life worth living? Howdy, and welcome to lucky episode number 13 of the Plutarch Project podcast. I'm your local art cognoscente, host Josh Niebert. Just a few announcements before we get started on our topic today. First and foremost, thank you to all the beautiful souls who have shared, commented on, and subscribed to the podcast website and Facebook stuff. You are all amazing. If you're picking up what we are putting down and liking it, don't forget to share and or review and help get information on the fascinating subject of the humanities out there to the world. Thanks. And tomorrow we will be letting the world know about our November giveaway winners for both YouTube and Facebook. So keep a close eye on your email, on your Facebook, and on your YouTube messages. So keep an eye out, and we will let you know about those tomorrow. Good luck. Alrighty then. That about covers it. So put on your best do-rag, some big golden chains, 2 or more should suffice. Grab your favorite leather-bound poetry book, a fine glass of boxed wine, and your driest bathrobe, because we are once again headed back to ancient Greece. Plato. You know him, I know him, we know him, and we just might love him. He's going to be today's starting point. For those of you folks just tuning in, we've talked about Plato several times in the past, so feel free to travel back and find out a bit more about him. Plato is really unique in that he was pretty much the first analytical philosopher whose work has survived into contemporary times. We have bits and pieces of other great thinkers, Socrates included, but a lot of their work that is available to modern audiences has just been mentioned in other works by later authors. Quite often, they are available only in short quotations. Basically, other thinkers' works are preserved like hors d'oeuvres, just enough to tantalize the taste buds of the mind, but not enough to really stunt the hunger pains of the philosophically inclined. The main course has been lost to time, but a few crumbs remain behind for us to chew on. Bear in mind, a lot of these people before Plato, including Socrates, taught orally. Their works often used the literary devices of poetry and metaphor to communicate abstract ideas. Their messages might not always be easy to understand using contemporary sensibilities or mindsets. We'll do our best to make sure we don't lead you astray on points that could be taken out of the historical and social context of their time. So, let's kick things off with Plato and his thoughts on art. Plato himself can definitely be considered an artist. His dialogues are polished and dense, and are rather like prose versions of ancient Greek plays. These plays, if you haven't ever had the pleasure of encountering them before, are a far cry from the elaborate nuances of Shakespearean stage plays a few centuries ago and Hollywood movie magic of today's world. These crazy things we take for granted now were not even a twinkle in the collective subconscious of humanity yet. These ancient plays were essentially a bunch of characters chatting it up on stage. Of course, some of them were particularly remarkable and laid the brickwork for quite a few modern narratives and scenarios that play out, but they weren't as action-packed and attention-grabbing as they have to be today. Plato wasn't interested in being a writer for literary or artsy-fartsy reasons. His primary goal was the dissemination of knowledge. Not just any knowledge, but what we would now categorize as philosophical knowledge or wisdom. Today, we can find his works in bookstores across the globe, open-source websites in dozens of languages, and even for free at the Amazon Kindle store. But he didn't publish them. They were used at his school, the Academy. Their purpose was to get students at the school up to par on the big issues of philosophy and to give them a chance to see what it was like to engage in conversation with Plato's own teacher, Socrates, who had long since passed away by the time the Academy was around. Today we'll be looking closer at his work Politeia, better known under its Latin title, The Republic. It's in this work that Plato argues that rational, scientific-minded philosophers should be the ones in charge of designing how society should function. In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato takes on the role of art, more specifically poetry and drama, and its purpose within a society. Let's step aside here for a moment. For this episode, when we discuss art, we will have to have a clear distinguishment between the pragmatic arts, the art of medicine, the art of law, the art of shipbuilding, or whatever that has some pragmatic purpose, and what we would now call the fine arts, poetry, painting, musical composition, photography, sculpting, and so on. For Plato, non-pragmatic art was merely a form of imitation of an imitation, reaching, but never quite able to grasp what it was trying to imitate, thus making it inferior. Now, what do we mean by an imitation of an imitation? For Plato, art is the copy of an object of the senses, which is only a copy of an idea. It's like using an original HD, clear and crisp photo. Let's say this photo was of a delicious, succulent, juicy green apple through a photocopier. Then taking that copy that you just produced, placing it onto the scanner and copying it again. If you've ever used a photocopier to make copies of copies, you'll be well aware that with each time a copy is copied, the picture begins to blur and lose more and more of its essential information, until eventually it is illegible. This is where Plato's reasoning comes into the picture. He raises the question that if we are getting a copy of a copy, are we really capable of seeing the ideal picture as it should be seen? In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato uses the example of a bed. The perfect idea of a bed was made by the Creator. The Creator works within the world of forms or ideas. The ideal bed, therefore, is imagined and created by a creator or God or whatever the essential being is. Now, a carpenter makes a bed with their pragmatic art of carpentry. It's a close approximation of the ideal bed, but alas, it cannot be perfect because it is within the physical world. No matter how perfectly it is crafted and made, it cannot match the idea made by the Creator. Then a painter comes along. Aha! What a beautiful bed! I must paint it! And so they paint that bed. Now, this painting is neither the idea of the bed, nor the carpenter's creation of the bed, but it is a copy of a copy, a mere visual appearance of a bed. Being that both the carpenter and the painter are imitating the idea of the bed, they are therefore, quote, a long way off the truth, and can do all things because they lightly touch upon a small part of them, and that part is an image, unquote. Plato is less harsh on the craftsmen or those using their arts to make things for pragmatic purposes. In a way, it kind of makes sense. The carpenter makes a bed for people to sleep in. A cobbler makes shoes to put on people's feet. A blacksmith makes metal goods for all kinds of purposes. But an artist, using Plato's example of the painter, only knows how to duplicate the image, and furthermore, only to duplicate it from a very specific vantage point. Let's see if we can illustrate this now. In your mind's eye, let's imagine a little cottage next to a stream. Beside the stream is a dense green forest. To the right of the cottage is a little cobblestone road. Here and there, a few potholes present themselves. The cottage itself is a weathered white, with a little chimney rising over the left side. Small tufts of smoke rise from the chimney up into the grisly gray sky above. Keep it in your mind's eye for a few seconds. Indubitably, your small cottage, stream, cobblestone road, and every other detail mentioned are going to be similar to my idea of them, but without a doubt, they are not going to be exact. Even if I were to describe to you in every minute detail of the entire scene, it still wouldn't match with my own. Many folks gripe about how a director or producer interpreted a film that they had read in book form, especially particularly popular films and books such as The Hobbit, Harry Potter, or, heck, even 50 Shades of Grey. Their ideas originating with the signs, signifiers, and signify just don't match up. Of course they're similar, but they're just not the same. But the words are the same for both people. wouldn't the idea be the same for both? If we are of the same species, use the same language and sign system, but come up with different results, how could we ever be on par with a universal being who, in order to exist, must be leaps and bounds beyond our own cognitive abilities? Plato noticed this trait in regards to how language functions and applied it to other arts that use the senses to describe or represent a grander idea. Artists, therefore, only know and understand a very small part of the grand idea that they are trying to illuminate, and their audience perhaps even less so than they do. Plato writes, quote, "The imitator or maker of the image knows nothing of the true existence. He knows appearances only," unquote. Going back to our example a few moments ago, I know nothing about how cobblestone roads are made, who walks on them, where the rock is sourced from, not to mention what the ideal form of a cobblestone road is. And it's pretty likely that you don't either. But we can arrange the words cobblestone road to match a similar image in each of our minds. If we have been previously introduced to the theory of what a cobblestone road is, it's a pretty easy exercise. And our notions of what they are similar enough to not really cause any problems. To put it another way, all things are copies of some divine or ideal state. Anything existing in the physical world that can be perceived by our senses is a shadow of the real thing. Plato refers to this as mimesis, or imitation or miming. Plato claimed that our world and everything in it was nothing but flawed or imperfect copies of the absolute being and the absolute reality that this being inhabits. This world of forms is located in some transcendental, immaterial, eternal realm far away from the three-dimensional world we inhabit. We can frame this absolute reality as if we were 2D Disney characters. The world of forms would be the Disney workshop back in its hand-drawn heyday. Although we find ourselves in the impractical, often flawed Disney universe, the origins of our own existence lay in a whole new realm where the ideas of the world we live in originate from. Countless beings with countless kinds of knowledge would keep adding more and more to our world, each, at least to our little 2D minds, having their own essential ideas of the world that creates our world. Now, without the ability to incorporate this ideal realm into our own world, the best we could do would be to seek out the ideal forms of living in this imperfect existence, which I guess you can boil down quite a bit of ancient philosophy to be just that, trying to find the best way to live. And if we are trying to find the best way to live, how can we incorporate the various forms we encounter here into that schema? In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato lays all of this out and then ponders over the role of art, specifically storytelling and poetry, in his ideal republic. After much debate, Plato decides that poetry and storytelling should be outlawed unless they can find a way to censor them with the aforementioned philosopher rulers as the head of those censors. Yeah, you heard it. Plato wanted to limit what was available to people, fearing that art and the power of imitation could be used for ill. These philosopher rulers would have the power to veto over what could be published and disseminated. He feared people would be exposed to literature, poetry, or other forms of art that could mislead them or alter the way they think or feel in irrational ways. This veto power would be used to help stifle the effect of mimesis. The author of a play, a work of literature, or a poem is in some way attempting to imitate the world. Art as an imitation of existence. This removes it twice from the realm of ideas and creates a greater chance for it to be flawed, leading people toward irrational choices in their existence, taking them further and further away from being able to find the ideal way of living. These philosopher rulers would act as filters to keep people from reading or seeing art that doesn't align with the views of the state, in Plato's case the pursuit of rational living. Even today, this idea still rages on. Rather than poetry or dramas, the medium of culture of artifacts, artifacts with an E, such as movies, video games, lyrics, YouTube videos, whatever kind of art you can shake a stick at, has the ability to affect society in a malevolent way. The cultural paradigm that either they are family friendly or evil or bad or whatever negative label is placed on something these days, has its roots in the dialogues of Plato's Republic. For Plato, his worries lay in the theory that these ideas weren't analytically based and hadn't been thought out in a logical or scientific way. Therefore, they couldn't be true, and were probably deceptive or problematic for consumers of these works, who they themselves probably didn't carefully engage with the ideas being presented. Personally, I don't think this is something that has changed. How often do you look at your friend or significant other or spouse or heck, even your pet hamster after watching a film, and ask them what the meaning of that work was, or how watching it has benefited both of you, or how you can learn and grow from that work? All the kids call it Netflix and philosophize. I'm sure you've heard of it. Sure, sometimes films or photos or any kind of art can make us do that, but sometimes you just want to zone out and be entertained. Let's take a look at another example. How often have you sang the lyrics of a song and been completely oblivious to their meaning until one day it hits you like a freight train? Wham! Oh, that's what they're talking about. Now, sometimes you're just naive, sometimes the language has changed, and sometimes the meaning of how it's taken has changed, right? The connotation and denotation are different for different generations. We've seen this happen to an entire generation in the last couple of years in regards to a very popular Christmas song. Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Which, not so coincidentally, people seem to have forgotten the context and historical time period the song came from, thus misinterpreting the nuances that are obvious for older generations. Perhaps this misunderstanding of the connotative and denotative meanings of the lyrics can be attributed to Plato's imitation theory, with each copy of the song, which hasn't changed as far as lyrics go over the generations that it's been around. The idea and the intent behind it has now become blurred and nearly unrecognizable as the world has changed around it. Without the aid of older folks or folks more wise in the ways of the world, these misinterpretations occur all the time, and not just in the realm of art. Modern-day politics, a subject you can investigate outside of this podcast for yourself, has similar problems. And guess what? None of this is new. These are the same damn stories being copied and copied and copied and passed on to the next generation. The next time you hear an argument on whether video games or whatever new TV show scandal that will come up next, you can tell your grandmother or your cat or pet turtle that this isn't a new phenomenon, and the earliest records we have of it date back to Plato. I'm sure they're going to be deeply impressed. Heck, yeah, your grandmother might even say, "Oh yes, that's nice, dear." And your turtle might retort, "Cool story, bro. Can you tell again?" But you'll know the truth, and you can try to find out how to think about it and how it can be applied to your own pursuit of a life worth living. In the end, Plato gave art a pass with a very strict restriction. That is, it should be heavily censored. Plato didn't seem to think about how ridiculously implausible this would be to do in his time, but later thinkers did. If you'd like to look into two very different thinkers and their ideas on censorship, and what essentially comes down to thought control, both of them put into their own respective fictional narratives, check out George Orwell's 1984, always super famous, everybody talks about it, or Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. A very different take, but I personally believe a little bit more likely than George Orwell's 1984. I'm sure you'll discover some incredibly potent ideas and some gems that relate to the world in which we currently live, and maybe you'll come out of it with some new ideas. Going back to the ancient world, Plato's student Aristotle expounded that art isn't an artist's attempt at copying an object. Rather, it is the artist's way of idealizing the core idea that is the object. An artist doesn't view the bed as the carpenter or the blacksmith. Rather, they attempt to pierce through the common conceptions of what a bed is to exhibit the core idea through the lens of the senses. Rather than copying a copy, they are trying to show or express the ideal version of a bed through their own existence, like shining a torch or a flashlight into a dark room, and whatever ends up being illuminated is their ideal version of whatever form they happen to shine their light on. Plato deemed this phenomenon as a kind of divine madness. It was divine because what sprung from it were awe-inspiring creations, but it was madness because the artists themselves had no real understanding of why they did it. Maybe an artist has a plan, Michelangelo plotting out the design for the Sistine Chapel, but how that plan, and furthermore how the end creation came to literally exist and why it came to exist is really a kind of madness. To the artist, their opinion is right, but how does the artist know that they're right? Let's take a step back and think about this for a second. We are thinking self-conscious animals. Why do we find it necessary to create art? It serves no pragmatic purposes, as Plato alluded to in, Book 10 of the Republic. It doesn't, at least on the surface, appear to help us exist, and yet we find it useful as a way to spend our time. It's a useful thing for us to do for reasons that we can't always explain. From the prehistorical humans, drawing in caves, to kindergartners across the globe finger painting with their teeny tiny fingers, to the greatest of the greats throughout time, what's the point or benefit of exploring, creating new things through the medium of art? Plato himself was an incredible artist, so perhaps it wasn't obvious to him. Taking a look at his work side by side with Aristotle's, you'll notice a very obvious difference. Aristotle's works have a much more scientific, high and dry kind of feel to them. They lack the artistic edge visible in Plato's work. It's from their differences that Aristotle was able to recognize something that Plato couldn't. Philosophy and art are actually two different spheres of thought, both aiming at the same goal. For Aristotle, the goal of art is a copy of the original idea. It's a way to display the universal through a particular medium. To return to Plato's metaphor, the painter doesn't regard the bed as a tool for sleeping. They find the particular universal aspect intrinsic within the idea of a bed and capture that fleeting eternal thought, freezing it for all time for others to gaze upon as an attempt to understand it. The artist doesn't create a sculpture or painting or work of literature to adhere to the faithful images apparent in their day-to-day lives. They take these ideas as suggestions and try to pull out the eternal essences which are imprisoned just behind the object's facade. For most people, they only see the object's image. Oh, wow, it's a bed. Looks comfy. But for the artist, they see something hidden within that picture that is meant to speak volumes to those looking to read it. Their goal as an artist is to exhibit whatever is universal about that particular image. Whether or not the audience gets it is a completely different story. The goal of both art and philosophy is the ability to capture and understand the absolute or the ideal versions of a concept that lies within the realm of the absolute or the universal. They are just going about it in a different way. Art is one path to helping to understand life, in past ages and in our own, and a guide to help us lead toward the best life that we can live. But they are not the same thing, just as two roads that converge at some point are still different roads altogether. So art and philosophy are different, but both reaching towards the same end game. Philosophy, art, and although we won't discuss it in detail today, history, all lead us to greater understanding of the world and help us toward our pursuit of living a life worth living. Let's imagine these three subjects as books piled on top of each other. On top would be philosophy. It is concerned with the universal as it really is, the original, not the copy. Art would then be second. It deals with finding the bits of the universal in the particular parts of the world. It's a copy of the original, illuminating the truest bits of the universal. And history would be placed third. This is concerned with the particulars as they are. Together, they form the basis for what has helped people live lives worth pursuing. To separate art and philosophy, it might be helpful to place them into a simple metaphor. Imagine a large crystal, the most pure crystal to ever exist. This will be philosophy. Placed over the crystal is a cloth. Through the cloth, you can see glimpses of the magnificent, universal, but never directly. It's always shrouded, or you're always peeping through a small hole in the cloth. This would be art. The goal of philosophy is to view the crystal without a wrapping, regardless of how opaque or transparent the cloth surrounding it is. Art uses the gaps in the cloth to glimpse a piece of the universal. Both are important, both are attempting toward the same goal, but both are indubitably going about it very differently. Although philosophy might be considered theoretically higher in its attempts, it doesn't mean that art is lower or worthless. Rather, the highest must rest upon the lower. Remember our stack of books earlier? You can't take away one of those books without harming the understanding of the others. Therefore, they create a symbiotic system with the goal of living the best life or pursuing truth or wisdom, or however, philosophy is defined by yourself or by philosophers past. The next time you find yourself examining a piece of art, ask yourself, what is the universal quality the artist is trying to express in this work? When you find yourself questioning the moral, ethical, or even the plain value of a work of art, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang. Try to search out the universal, even if it doesn't seem like it's there. The next time you have an experience that you feel pulls you into another world, say a concert, or you join in part of 100,000 people at an EDM event, or you have a particularly incredible work of fine art just grab your attention. Ask yourself, what is it that you feel pulling you? Is it Plato's world of forms? Is it God or some other divine presence? Maybe hidden behind your own biases and those biases and lenses that you've been given from those before you and the society that you exist in, you'll find a piece of timeless wisdom that will add value to your existence. And if you do, take it along with you. Thanks for listening, and good luck making this life the best of all possible outcomes. Onward. Hey there. Thanks for stopping by and learning something new. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider supporting us. Even clicking on an advert on the old website plutarchproject.com keeps us up and running. Remember, support doesn't have to come from your wallet. Some of the most important kinds of support come from that beautiful mind that you've got. Writing a review, telling a friend, sharing this podcast with a lover or an enemy, subscribing to our YouTube channel or Facebook page or to whatever podcast service that you use are all ways that you can lend your support. If you're listening on YouTube, you can find our podcast with a slightly better audio profile on all major podcast services, including iTunes, Stitcher, CastBox, so on and so forth. If you are really looking to help us out, you can use our Amazon banner located on the bottom of the website or on the Support Us tab. All it takes is a click from you, but every penny we get to steal from Jeff Bezos adds up for us. We also have a Patreon page if you'd be willing to give us $2 a month. We'll immortalize you on our patron wall on our website with a photo and a quote of your choice. Check us out at patreon.com/PlutarchProject for that kind of information. Thank you for your time and attention. Good day! Meow.